Hello and welcome to the BuiltOnAir podcast. BuiltOnAir is a regular podcast where we talk with everyday people and learn about the amazing things they are doing with Airtable. Today's podcast is sponsored by OpenSide, the leading solutions provider for Airtable customers. Check out openside.com to learn more about their products and services that can take your Airtable usage to the next level. Use promo code BuiltOnAir to receive $20 towards any product purchase. On today's episode, we speak with Bill French, technology innovator and entrepreneur. Bill founded Global Technologies Corporation in 1981, giving him over 30 years of experience in software products and services. You may recognize his name from the Airtable Community Forum, where he regularly shares his advice, professional insight, and tools he has built with Airtable. When a company using Airtable reached out for Bill's help in 2016, he was quickly compelled by the product's logical and sleek design. He could see the value that a, quote, no-code environment provides users. However, Bill also expertly points out that no code is also code for potentially limiting, which is where he comes in. When it comes to adding new features, Bill often tells his clients to think about adding plumbing rather than a second kitchen sink. He thoughtfully applies this to Airtable's new scripting block. If Airtable is a kitchen sink, the scripting block is new plumbing, allowing us to build what we want. We discuss the block at length and get to see some of the awesome things he has built with it. Bill shows us a few scripts he has written for the new block, complete with many tips and tricks. He demonstrates block chaining, in which he is able to run one block after another. Check out the show notes for a link to the post that Bill wrote about this. He also shows us Dot. Dot is a program he wrote in the scripting block, which he calls a tribute to an early program called DBase. DBase was navigated by a Dot prompt line. Dot allows Bill to drill down into his tables and sift through his data in more advanced and exciting ways. And one thing I noticed, you'd sent me a screenshot that I found really interesting. You used the embed block to display kind of a program that you had already written, but you're embedding it within a block.
Yeah, so I think the one that you're referring to was Airborne Search. Yeah. So I do a lot of search systems, and one client out of New Jersey specifically asked me, could you create, a full text index search? And as you know, Airtable has a search feature, but it's not a full text index. It's literally, here's a word, go find that word kind of thing. And that's kind of interesting. I mean, it's very useful in that sense, but it doesn't give you the ability to do two things. Number one, look for ors and ands, or a Boolean search, right, about the criteria. And it also doesn't give you the ability to rank anything, right? And so ranking, to me, if you have a search system and you don't perform ranking, then you really don't have a search system, because relevance is so critical. Google taught us this in 1997, and we have not forgotten that lesson. When we search, we need relevance. And so mention of a word in a table name should be ranked a little bit higher than the mention of that word in a tag field, right? And so Airborne was built, and there is a link, I think, in the show notes. It's right here where I said, search is not so simple. Here's why. And so there's an entire white paper on what I did with Airborne. And I wanted it to run inside the context of Airtable, because with it, I was able to put the search results not in the block, but in the adjacent table.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of important, because oftentimes you're searching for data, you want it to be data when you're done, so that you can do other things like filter on it, or do some computations on fields that you ordinarily wouldn't do had you not found that data set. Right. And so there's a lot of nuances about that. And that's why I said, okay, well, it's a web app, but it needs to run in a block, because I don't have access to build custom blocks. Otherwise, I would probably build it as a custom block. And who knows, Airborne may come out as a custom block, because now I do have access to build custom blocks. So that's good. That's an important step. It's going to take some time, though, because custom blocks are not as easy to deal with as script blocks. It's a true full development environment, so you have to be very diligent about that. But in terms of search, one thing that I saw within Airtable was, it really didn't do a whole lot, and there were a lot of complaints. Um, you can't easily cross bases or workspaces. So
Right.
imagine a search index that crossed bases as well as workspaces.
Mm-hmm.
So multiple different workspaces could have a search index that would allow you to go to any of these workspaces and find data that you're looking for, or find all the relevances between them. But it's not easy, because think about just the security issues that go on. Yes, the index found all this information, but are you allowed to actually see it? Right? And so just finding the reference to employee layoff somewhere would be cause for, some kind of a security breach.
Mm-hmm.
And so typically people blame Airtable for not having a good search, and I'm kind of a defender of Airtable in that sense, in that search is not easy. And I've seen comments on the forum where, people will just say, wow, how hard can it be? It's just search. Yeah, it's hard. It's very hard. And
Yeah.
in fact, it's probably far more hard than you could even imagine. And so my white paper kind of goes into that, and it covers a lot of the reasons why search is a tough place to get into there. And then there's, the other big question, even if you could index all Airtable data, where would you put it? That you would feel comfortable, because now you have pointers into everything in your information set. So this is a huge security challenge as well. But we underestimate these things because we think, oh, Google made it easy. Yeah, they did, to a point. And I'm sure those 17 PhDs came up with how Google algorithms work. I'm sure they thought it was easy too, in that it took them 11 years to get it right.
Right.
So yeah, no, it's not easy. Anyway, so I think you had another question beyond, doing that, using a script or using a block, an embed block to map in web applications. That's difficult. It's kind of convoluted. It does work, and it does allow you some latitude to do things, but there's a disconnect, right?
Right.
You've got a block running a web app that's over here, and the web app has no concept whatsoever about what's in frame.
Right.
It doesn't see the data there, and there's no web interface to the data that you see in the same browser.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a total showstopper for me. It's, that's why I call Airborne a research project. It's not ready for prime time. I have installed it on 4 client environments so far. Every one of them is a one-off for that particular client. And so, it's good stuff, good code, gives them really powerful features, but it's costly to implement, and it's not the most ideal place to do it. Now, when you get into script blocks, of course, script blocks see everything that's in frame.
Yes.
Huge advantage there. In fact, maybe somebody should build a search engine in a script block. It could be done.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we got past that. So why do script blocks matter? We kind of talked about a few of them, but here's some points to think about. A script block can be an intelligence proxy, right? So it's somebody who says, like you said earlier, there's something I'd like the script block to do. Just keep it maintained on a regular basis, because I don't want users having to remember how to do this.
Right.
What you're doing is wrapping that business logic in a script, so that regular people who are just trying to get their data job done can benefit from that logic, and you can deploy it into a script block, run it, and it will run the same way every time. So that's kind of cool. Process automation, we've talked about that. Overcoming limitations, huge opportunity to overcome limitations in Airtable. For example, search and replace. You can build every manner of search and replace using a script block. You have to be very careful, about how you do it.
Yeah.
Because you can screw up your data.
Easily.
Right.
Yeah.
Easily, very easily.
Yeah.
This is why I think I created one called, it's not featured in today's podcast, but if you look for, I think it's Field Tweaker, there's a perfect example of why coders shouldn't name things, right? A marketing guy would look at that and go, oh, Bill, you screwed that up. Field Tweaker? It has drug inferences. It's got all kinds of problems with that name. But anyway, it's called Field Tweaker. And in Field Tweaker, I give you a grid of the likely changes it's going to make, and then a button that says, "Are you sure?" right before it applies it. So, I try to, to do a well-intentioned outcome on that. But here's another cool thing. Uh, because the data is so readily available to script blocks, you have opportunities to blend those two worlds like never before. And I think that's where a lot of innovation is going to occur. Here's a good example. We'll switch over to this thing I called answer machines. See if I can find it here. And it kind of falls under, actually, I'm going to first show you where I wrote about it, okay? Here on the forum, I wrote about it, blockchaining, which is not to be confused with blockchain, which is the entire alternative money kind of approach, or the technology behind alternative currencies. Blockchaining is a little bit different. Imagine you have a block and you want to run it and then run another block.
Right.
And then continue that process and then maybe run a third, a fourth, a fifth block. And so I wrote about this idea behind blockchaining, and I actually give an example here. In this particular example, is that large enough? You can see that all right?
Certainly.
Good. So I have a table. It's just called "How are you doing?" Right? And in it, you can see it's got these steps, and then down here, I'll widen this a little bit so you can see. There's your happiness assessment is complete. So I've got these 3 steps and a happiness assessment as the final step. And here I've got questions. Are you happy? Is it a nice day? Are you looking forward to the weekend? Right? And then a column for answers. And you can see how I answered this recently. And then over here, a really interesting field, which we won't discover just yet. I'm going to stop this and rerun it. And the first thing I'm going to do is pick the table, how are you doing?
Okay.
And so how are you doing is literally this table. And when I select it, it's going to run. And you notice it emptied the answers. And now it's asking me, how am I doing? I'm going to say yes. Is it a nice day? No, it's very rainy here today. I am looking forward to the weekend because it is Friday.
All right.
Despite the fact that it's the 13th, we'll get through it.
We will.
And I answer yes. And now it says, it appears you are 66% happy today.
All
Right. So that's so dreadfully simple, boring. I hope listeners aren't yawning right now. But building a little script block to do that would be quite easy to do, as you know. It's just a collection of questions with answers. But what if none of the code that we just ran was in the script block? So let's go over here and look at this guy. There's the code.
I like it. Cool.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because what you're doing is you're blending, and I think I had a bullet point in the previous, over in the show notes where I said, hey, the juxtaposition of data and code are really important. I don't think we're really given that as much credit as we might ought to, because it gives us the ability to abstract code as data. Airtable is phenomenal with storing strings. And in this case, this is a long string field. And I literally could write into this code my script block questions as data and then run them as separate blocks.
Right.
And so one must then ask, well, what happens when you get to the end of the process? Well, it gets a little more complex, right? Because you want to take the array of answers that you grabbed along the way. What that means is that array has to be scoped at the blockchain level.
Right.
So, it's a sustained array. You're building up answers as you go. And eventually you get down to the end and you say, oh, well, let's take the array, loop through it, find out how many are yes, apply a score of 1 to those with yes, and then let's compute a happiness score right here. And then let's wrap it up. It's a wrap. We're finished. Thanks for running it. And we display it over here. And so this little block, if you edit this block, is that large enough?
Yes.
Okay. is very simple. You'll see there's no questions in here.
Right.
It's 112 lines of pure magic.
So
and there's one specific line that's true magic that took me many, many hours to figure out. And it's the one that actually executes. Can I move? I can't move that, can I?
oh, I don't know.
All right, there we go. I can get it in frame. There it is. This little guy is how we eval the script coming from the data set.
Oh.
I'm not even going to begin to explain that because we're trying to keep this light. It's Friday. We don't want to get too techie on this. This is probably good for a Monday morning, but this is a brain teaser because it has to sustain as I said, it has to sustain the scope between all the different evaluations of the block. Now, technically, this is not one block running many blocks. It's one block evaluating many blocks. And there's a difference, right? So at the end of this block, it doesn't call another block. There's no facility in Airtable to do that. And that was one of the things that came to mind when a client said, hey, I need to walk somebody through a series of steps to answer a bunch of questions, and I need to have a very easy ability to change it frequently and also reorder it. Because remember, now that we have this as data, how hard is it to move step 1 to step 3?
Right.
And vice versa. So we now have a framework for saying all of these questions can be ordered by ordinary people who know nothing about code.
Right.
That's pretty clever when you get right down to it. So I had a lot of fun building that, and this is really just an example of that project. The project is much more complex, and it deals with some electronic parts, basically, a kind of an expert system. And you can see this in others too. So here's a very simple math quiz. We can run this guy again, pick the math quiz, next. And now it's going to empty the answers, of course. 1 plus 1, well, it depends on who you ask. Sometimes it's 3, but normally it's 2. 9 times 2, I'm going to go with 18. And 150 minus 49, I think it's 101. And there it is. I got it 100% correct. And so here's a little flashcard thing. I know there's a new script block about flashcards too, which is, I'm pretty sure it's configurable and you can do some other cool things. This is not intended to be a competitor to that. It's intended to evoke the idea that script can exist almost anywhere, including in data. And so if we were to look at one of these guys, you'll see there's the question, right? And by the way, that is just doing a tease out of the first column, right? So that it's just something I can completely use as a template. And here I'm just asking for questions with 4 answers, and that's it. That's the only script that needs to run or be interpreted for each step. And there you have a really cool thing. You can get into some other cool things like an expert system. Year of the car, make of the car, model of the car, etc. And so running this against that particular expert system gives us, as you would guess, simple questions that allow us to say, the year is 2019, it's a Chevy, and it's a Silverado. What is the color? Oh, it's white. All right. And so this is not intended to show you any result, more to show you there's the array that it collected. End of story. Now you're in a position to use that array data to do something with, to do, some other kind of lookups in other tables and things like that. So this example was really geared to, like, I don't know, crack your skull open and pour in a really crazy, notion that script blocks can interpret other script fragments.
That is so interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's how my mind works. As my wife says often, it's frightening to live with this guy.
No, I think that's wonderful. Because I find myself, it's not JavaScript, but I mark up the data within Airtable as HTML. Like I use rollups and I create tables. And then I can export that as like a PDF and it looks really nice and pretty. But this is kind of similar way with using JavaScript in the field itself.
Yes. Yeah, it's a good way to think.
Yeah.
you're thinking more abstractly about how your data sets come together.
Yeah.
And that's all this, experiment was designed to do. And 100% of the code is shared here. I'm pretty sure. I think I published it down here at the
Awesome.
bottom. If I didn't, I'll make sure I get it into the show notes.
Wonderful.
So we're probably running low on time, right? So I don't want to, tease everything, but let me show you another example. We could go into the forecasting example, but forecasting is fully written about in depth here.
Mhm.
Um, we're using machine learning to say, hey, every time a new year of sales or a new month of sales comes online, we can forecast in a very deep way using a script block. And briefly, the block for doing that it is pretty simple. The part that isn't so simple is what is the forecasting function?
Mhm.
And that looks just ugly as heck, and I apologize for that. But that's basically a triple exponential smoothing algorithm. And our goal is not to go into that in depth. Our goal is to really understand, is it possible to do some of these very complex algorithms in script block? And there's your answer. And so this is kind of a nice experiment. It works really well. It does, it does really good forecasting. I've also done another example where I use script block to detect outliers.
Mhm.
Outliers is an equally troubling thing because the definition of an outlier is a fleeting concept in machine learning.
Mhm.
But you can train a data set to learn, well, what is not right here? And you could use it to flag entries that should be reviewed. And you could do all that in a script block. I've written about that up on the forum as well. I think if you just search for outliers, you'll probably find that one. But here's another one that is really getting me interested. Disregard the data on the left for a minute, and
Okay.
I'll run this guy. This guy is called Dot. Um, Again, coders shouldn't be inventing names. Uh, but it is a tribute to the early days of DBase. In the early days of DBase, we have this concept of a dot prompt. And
Mhm.
so everything was at a dot. And so I named this Dot. Um, I think it's female because she's smart. Uh, so I'm
Yes.
not pandering. I'm just saying Dot is pretty intelligent. And so, for example, you'll notice, it's running. So this isn't one of those unending blocks. It never is designed to end.
Okay.
Although I can tell it to just quit, and Dot has terminated, right?
Uh-huh.
So I'll go ahead and run it again. But I can also do things like, um, and I'm going to widen this just a little bit to give it a little. I guess I can't. I'm at the max. We can do things like use, right? Or open. We'll use open. And so open by itself says, oh, you must want to open a table.
Mhm.
And we're going to pick a table. And here I'm just going to I'll pick facets. And when I click next, it says, okay, it's open. There's 14 records. What would you like to do? Well, I could list it. So now I have a listing of all the fields, or sorry, all the records, the 14 records. And of course, it's defaulting to the primary field, but it's also linking. And if I click on one of these guys, I'm now in Airtable uh, with an error. So you can tell it's definitely a real demo. uh, let's see if we refresh the page. Is it simply, I'm not sure why it's not thinking that. That looks right. That record and stuff looks good
Yeah.
there. We'll try another one here in a minute. The beauty of this, of course, is, let's see if it does it differently. Yeah, it's not doing it for some reason.
Hmm.
It could be my table is actually kind of screwed up. Anyway, so Dot has this kind of intelligence about what's going on, and if I type use again, it's going to say, hey, get a different table. We'll just pull up AirDrop here. And if I say list, I should get those records. And if I say fields, I should see all the fields.
Oh, wow.
And if I say something like open, let's open tags. Oops. It doesn't like that, so it's saying, "Oh, you better do it with your mouse because you couldn't spell." Um, and I'll demonstrate. the new clear function, /C. I can also do /H. I can do pretty much anything with a / command as well. So this was kind of patterned after a number of different projects, including the superhuman email environment that I use. That's the email system where they charge you $30 to check your email every month.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's $30 a month. And I'm a proud payer of $30 just to check my email. You know, who saw that coming? Anyway, so yeah. And I love it. I want to pay that bill every month. We can do another podcast on that some other day. But anyway, so Dot has this unique ability. Let me scroll back up to say, all right, we're going to use tags. And you notice that's all lowercase, but it opened it.
All right.
So the table name is uppercase. Dot is smart enough to know, that, hey, this is, something that, we can get access to and do something with. And I'm going to go ahead and now just do a quick clear. And now that I have, I can also type tables, so it can give me the tables as well. So that's kind of nice. So let's do something like something Dot would be really smart about. Let's say, so we're in tags right now.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make sure we're in tags. I'm going to say count. Let's count Mobotics in content. 4 instances, and there's my records. So that's kind of cool. So imagine an interactive command line in a script block that has an intense knowledge about the data that you have in frame. I say in frame, I mean in browser. Right. It's basically, the browser is aware of all these things, and script blocks make it very easy for us to put our arms around that schema, around the data, around the records, and even around commands that say, hey, go count. How many times is this word in my database? You can do that in search, right?
Right.
It's tedious, though. Imagine now you wanted to say, show me the count of these words in these fields and tell me the percentage of when it's used. This is a simple JavaScript computation at that point. And so I love it. That's what Dot is about. I haven't published the source code for this yet, but I'm sure there'll come a time where I'll share this. But again, it's a research tool. It's one of those cases where I said, what if it were interactive, and what if it were command line driven, so that you could do really fast things with regard to data science or research, or I'm just trying to locate something, right?
Right.
It's not really search. It's a little bit different than search.
Mm-hmm.
I've envisioned, eventually when, schema goes a little bit further and allows us to create fields, we should be able to create a table here. Create table, and then list all the fields you need. Right. And then go through and with a grid, just check off, what kind of types you want. And instead of taking forever to build a table, you're literally building a table in seconds.
Absolutely.
So I see Dot kind of as a productivity measure more than anything, a way for power users to really get into their data and say, replace content with any instance of whatever with whatever instance you want.
Right.
And so you could do a command line kind of replacements and things like that. Anyway, I don't want to hold you up and keep this podcast going so long, but those were some of the things that I thought would be compelling for people to think about and learn.
I am certainly compelled.
Good, really. Good. I was shooting for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You've used those. I'm a little blown away. I think it's brilliant the way you've used those blocks, and I can see a million different uses down the line for them.
Yes.
So bravo.
And that underscores this guy right here, opportunistically integrated, right? Those are 2 incredible words when put together, and you think, blocks are designed, to allow us to do these basic, simple things. I don't think so. I think blocks opens the sky. Literally the sky now becomes the limit, because you have this juxtaposition between the actual data in memory, mind you, it's in the browser. You don't have to think about going and getting the data like you do in a normal API environment. and it's sitting there right close to an environment that allows you to create an intelligence proxy. So, bullet point 1 combined with bullet point 3, oh my gosh, the solutions that we can create from this to help users, it's phenomenal in my view. So,
It certainly is.
yeah.
Well, I'm super excited to see what comes next.
It's scary.
It is.
If I'm involved, it'll be frightening at times.
Oh, we've certainly got a lot to
I often advise people who are thinking about hiring me, you should fear hiring me. There are cases where I can run off a cliff really fast.
You do a good job with it. I can tell.
It's enjoyable. This is the fun I get, from dabbling. And I think Airtable is just wonderful. It's wonderful in terms of the sense that it really helps you keep your hands dirty in data. I think that's important for any kind of coders. They need to experience what their clients are experiencing. And I think it's important to find ways to shape these tools to meet requirements that, mentally you've dismissed. I mean, you've almost said, oh, it goes without saying you can't do that. And those are the kind of projects where I think it becomes interesting to try to prove that, no, it doesn't go without saying. This is something you can do. These are things you can explore. So it does require some JavaScript knowledge. I know that's a stretch for a lot of users, and we see it on the forums a lot. Over time, they'll come up to speed, and I think a lot of sharing is going to be really critical to help people, have that JavaScript light bulb come on, right?
Right.
So what's your background in terms of JavaScript? How did you learn it?
I'm actually entirely self-taught. I started in a very niche environment where I am coding PDFs in Acrobat, Acrobat DC. So I use, user inputs to inform other fields, and I dynamically create pages. And basically, the biggest package I've worked on is a big truck sales paperwork package. So they put in the year, make, model of the truck, and then they hit a button to generate, and they get their bill of sale, they get their buyer's order, they get all the odometer statement and all that stuff. So
whenever you buy a car, that's the magic you see by the finance person, right?
Right.
That finance person is sitting there and they're doing a couple little taps and things, and out pops 57 pages of ways for you to sign your life away. Right.
Exactly it. Yes.
Right. And in most states, it's a very complex set of paperwork because of the UCC laws, right?
Exactly. And the one I built it's for 3 states, because it's my family business. We own a truck dealership, and we're in 3 states, and we've got 3 different sets of paperwork. So that all had to take into account, what state, city, what forms they need for Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont.
Yes. Yeah. The nature of what you did there. I mean, you just described how much of a domain expert you had to be for those 3 states.
Right.
In terms of producing financial documents. Mm-hmm. And that makes you incredibly qualified to do that, because you now have, JavaScript to go behind that. And the fact that you're self-taught, I think that's wonderful.
Thank you.
I think that's exactly how good JavaScript developers emerge in this industry. They are users, database people, domain experts, and then ultimately they say, I got to broaden my horizon just a tiny bit.
Right.
And that's why I think script blocks are just phenomenal as a teaching tool as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to dive in a little bit more. I haven't even had the time, but
Have you noticed that? Ever since script blocks came out, I am just salivating over doing X and Y and Z in the script block environment. And, clients are saying, no, I need this, this, and this. And so I have to say no to my urge to go crazy with script blocks. And, even so, I'm spending some night hour, trying to get some of these blocks to run. But it's a phenomenal environment that is fun. There's no doubt about it.
Agreed. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Bill, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for talking with me today. And before we let you go, where can our listeners go to learn more about you and Global Technologies Corporation?
Well, they can go to globaltc.com. That's loosely described as a marketing site about some of the things I do.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the show notes. The show notes have a link to this page that we're looking at here.
Mm-hmm.
And this page, I'll continue to update if any changes occur. But I think the right place really to find the intersection of my brain, which is, again, scary sometimes, with Airtable is probably in the Airtable Forum. At Bill French, you'll find everything that I've ever written. Some of it regrettable, but for the most part, I keep it clean. And I try to be honest. I try to, if I'm wrong, I like to admit I'm wrong. So, I try to be fair. Most of the time, I'm not wrong. Just saying.
Well, I can attest to that.
Yeah. Most of the time, I'm not wrong.
Yes.
But I do get it wrong sometime, but I'm willing to make it right too. So that's kind of fun.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, Bill. I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
You too.
Keep in touch.
You bet. Have a
Thank
good one.
You too.